Joe Biden and AOC throw a little bit of a temper tantrum after the Supreme Court issued some rulings that they do not like. Joe says they're not done, even though the Supreme Court came out and said, well, what you've done here is entirely unconstitutional and largely insane, wiping out $500 billion of student loans with the stroke of a pen using some obscure law that's clearly unconstitutional. But they say, but we wanted to do something good with that. And you say, okay, but we all want to do something good, but you have to do it within the confines of reality. They don't like that. This is Biden. He is now saying that there is more coming, students. If you wanted that money gone for no real reason other than Joe Biden wanted your votes, that money's not going away now, except it might be, because Joe Biden has some more convoluted plans that he's going to try to squeeze through, like he's done this one and many others before.
So let me be clear.
Okay.
Republicans in Congress, it's not about reducing the deficit. It's not about fairness in forgiving loans. It's only about forgiving loans they have to pay. Today, the Supreme Court sided with them. I believe the court's decision to strike down my student debt relief program was a mistake, was wrong. I'm not going to stop fighting to deliver borrowers what they need, particularly those at the bottom end of the economic scale. So we need to find a new way.
And remember that other one wasn't really about the people at the bottom of the economic scale. It was kind of like a flat 10 grand off the top. And there were numbers of people who were upset that it was impacting people that had, tech jobs and stuff like that. Like, in other words, not the people that necessarily needed it. It was not means tested. It was just a blanket, here you go vote for Joe.
And we're moving as fast as we can. First, I'm announcing today,
hopefully faster than this speech,
a new path consistent with today's ruling to provide student debt relief to as many borrowers as possible, as quickly as possible.
Okay, what's the plan?
We will ground this new approach in a different law than my original plan.
Okay.
The so-called Higher Education Act. That will allow Secretary Cardona, who's with me today,
we're going to hear from him,
to compromise, waive, or release loans under certain circumstances. This new path is legally sound. It's going to take longer, but in my view, it's the best path that remains to providing for as many borrowers as possible with debt relief. I've directed my team to move as quickly as possible under the law.
All right, so hopefully they move quicker than Joe for their sake, because I'm not sure how much time he's got left. But that was the speech, right? We're going to keep working on it. Not a lot of details there. We're going to hear from Miguel Cardona, who spoke with Jen Psaki about this on one of the Sunday shows. But Biden got asked a question about delivering false hope, which in my opinion was clearly exactly what happened. I mean, this was almost by design. We read through this executive order that he signed a long time ago when he initially signed it, and we go, what is he talking about? We read the lawsuit. There's really no justification for even attempting this. And this is why I think even the media is asking him questions like this. Like, everybody who's responsible in government knew that this was never going to pass. It was insane because if it happened this way, if this was allowed, we might as well just get rid of Congress. We just actually don't need Congress at all. If Joe Biden can just, with the stroke of a pen, rewrite the laws and waive, $500 billion in debt like that, do we need a judiciary even at all? AOC is going to tell us probably not. But it was false hope. They knew it was false hope. They did it intentionally and maliciously. It was very Machiavellian. And now they're getting asked about it. And Joe doesn't like the questions.
We get this done, God willing. Thank you.
Mr. President, why did you give millions of borrowers false hope? You've doubted your own authority here in the past.
I didn't give any false hope.
Yeah, you did.
The question was whether or not I would do even more than was requested. What I did, I thought was appropriate and was able to be done and would get done. I didn't give borrowers false hope, but the Republicans snatched away the hope that they were given, and it's real hope. Thank you.
Okay, so he did give them hope, but it wasn't false. It was real hope, and the Republicans ripped it out from under him. Now, what's strange about this is other Democrats have confirmed the president doesn't have this authority. I mean, one of the most recited phrases in government that Congress has, which is called the spending power, the power of the purse. We hear that all the time. Who has the power of the purse in our government? Congress does, not the executive branch. So they don't just wave with the stroke of a pen $500 billion. So it was false hope. He had no basis for doing this on the back of the COVID pandemic, and the Supreme Court found accordingly. He doesn't like the question, though, and it's the Republicans' fault that he attempted some unconstitutional brain-dead maneuver.
Mr. President, when you canceled student debt?
Did you overstep your authority?
I think the court misinterpreted the Constitution.
Yeah.
Mr. President, do you admit failure in Afghanistan? Mistakes? There was a report on Afghanistan in Joe saying there was failure, mistakes. Do you admit there was mistakes during the withdrawal and before?
No, all the evidence is coming back there. Remember what I said about Afghanistan? I said Al-Qaeda would not be there. I said it wouldn't be there. I said we'd get help from the Taliban. What's happening now? What's going on? Read your press.
A little too close for
I was right. Thanks.
So the report is from the State Department, actually, about the withdrawal.
President Biden reacted.
The reporter says, well, the report is from the State Department. Dum-dum. Where'd you think it came from? Jim Jordan? No, it came from your own State Department. So you were wrong and wrong and wrong. But he gets very upset about it when you question him. It's weird. Sometimes it's like, do they even know what's going on? Does he even know what happened in Afghanistan or remember? I'm not so sure about it. That was the brief in front of the press. Miguel Cardona had to come and actually explain it. And I think at this point when they were actually talking about it, they probably didn't have much of a plan, but as we've talked about here many times, one of the main strategies, if not the strategy of the Democratic Party, is to cobble together a bunch of different constituencies. And they treat people like trading cards. I got 3 of this kind, I got 2 of this kind, I got a full house here, I've got 4, 2 pair over here, I got 4 of a kind on this one. And they just assemble different people together, and they do it by color and gender and nationality, and they victimify everybody. And then they say, we're going to resolve your victimhood. Come vote for the Democrats. And they just try to layer these one after another and build up this big deck of all these different people and divisions within society, and then cobble them together. So this is a pretty big constituency. I mean, students who were promised relief by Joe Biden, who bought it, made decisions, made changes in their lives, and I would guess spent the money in some way, shape, or form that they were expecting relief from. And Joe Biden tried to do something that was outside the bounds of the Constitution. So now we have the Secretary of Education trying to clean it up. What are they going to do? They don't want to lose that big constituency, all of those college kids and all of the tech bros from California who wanted this money gone. This is Psaki and Cardona talking about it.
The Education Secretary, Miguel Cardona. I just want to start here. So many people across the country, students, people who are paying loans, have lots of questions. So on Friday, President Biden announced a new plan to work around the court's ruling on the administration's student debt program by using the 1965 Higher Education Act. What are the next steps in that? Because a lot of that's on you. And how long do you anticipate it will take, or people should expect it to take?
Yeah, because we've got student loans coming due very soon, by the way, in September. Something like 40 million. I don't know. Don't hold me to the numbers, but huge, tens of millions of student loans are going to come back online. Boom. And we know that a lot of people have been living the last 3 years without really preparing for that. When you start to waft away those different obligations, they get replaced pretty quickly. So now you're going to turn that spigot back on. Got to start paying your money. And this debt relief that may have enabled some dismissals of those loans or lower payment amounts or whatever are all now off the table. So they're about to hit panic mode, because think about the domino effect of this. What happens, let's say, for example, you just follow it down the line. You have student loans, and let's say students don't pay their loans. The government has a big problem. They'll figure that out. But let's go the other way. Let's leave the government out of it. Students start paying their loans again. So let's say that $300 to $500 for the grad students, $1,000 a month. All those loans come back up. That discretionary spending goes away. So a big portion of that money goes out of the economy. Now what happens if you've got commercial real estate dry up because people aren't going to salons and getting as many goods and services? So the brick and mortar businesses start having problems. The commercial real estate starts to suffer. We know that is already in a precarious position because the banks hold a lot of that paper. So no matter how you splice it, right, this could lead to a domino effect. So the banks are now on the hook with all this commercial real estate that's bad paper, and the banks are in a problem. And if other students are defaulting, then the government has a problem. So we've got a very precarious position here, and they're trying to figure out how to thread the needle. Here is Cardona.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Jen. It's really important, first of all, that borrowers hear loud and clearly that we're not stopping the fight, that we recognize how important this is. So as you mentioned, within hours of the Supreme Court decision, which we totally disagree with, I think is wrong, we announced that we are moving forward with another pathway to debt relief. There's going to be a public hearing. It's a negotiated rulemaking process, which, as the president said Friday, takes a little bit longer, but it is a pathway that I have available to provide debt relief, and we're going to be using that. And we're starting the process. We started it Friday. The first step is an open hearing that will be taking information and taking public comment, and that's happening in July.
So as a part of this announcement, there's going to be a 12-month period for borrowers reentering payments beginning in October. For young people out there who are kind of freaking out right now because they're not sure if they can make their payments, they don't know if their current salary will allow them to make their payments, what do you tell them? How will that work?
43 million people were waiting for a positive decision on Friday. And we're going to keep fighting. So in addition to the rulemaking process that's going to move us forward with another plan for debt relief, we're providing 2 other things. An on-ramp, what we're calling an on-ramp, while interest will accrue.
So just think about that. 43 million people. What if just, I don't know, a third of those default one way or the other because they were expecting that 10 grand or that 20 grand to come back down and they racked up credit card debts or whatever? That could have a very big snowball effect.
And payments are due. We are not going to be harming those who are struggling to make payments for the first 12 months. We're calling it an on-ramp. We're not going to be giving information to credit reporting agencies. We want to make sure we're preventing people from falling into default and delinquencies. We're creating that on-ramp again. We're also rolling out our SAVE income-driven repayment program. So basically, and I'm really excited about this, Jen, this is a big deal. For undergraduate students, their loan payments will be cut in half. If your salary is less than $33,000 a year, your loan payment will go down to $0. We're making sure that we're rolling out a plan that's responsible, where people are not going to be asked to pay more than they can afford. So we have three things. We have the debt relief plan that we're rolling out. We have the income-driven repayment plan, which is new, and it's the best one ever. And we have the on-ramp to make sure that we're supporting our borrowers as they return to repayment.
Yeah, all that stuff sounds probably within the law, all with, and I haven't seen the exact law, but that sounds like executive function that is actually delineated in the law. There's hardship and bankruptcy rules, and there's all sorts of different provisions where I think they could probably fit some of that stuff into. And so that's okay, right? If they want to go that route and operate within the confines of the law, it's hard to have a real argument with that. And I personally don't want students to be harmed and damaged as a result of what our government did to us in 2020. They really wrecked society in a major way. And there were a lot of kids in school who paid a lot of money and didn't get any education. They were, zoomed out on classrooms and all sorts of stuff. And I think we do have a very predatory loan system, and we're asking students to, the government just hands out loans like Skittles, and a lot of kids get into irresponsible situations because we've been taught our whole lives, you got to go to college in order to do well in this country. And so I'm all for our country helping our citizens. There should be some sort of a dividend for living in America and paying all these taxes. What are we paying all these taxes for? For Ukraine? I'm more interested in helping our citizens. And if we had competent leadership that could do that, I'm fine with that. But constitutionally, not unconstitutionally, trying to become Congress as the executive branch. That's insane. That's how you destroy a country, and we live in a society of lawlessness. So, all right, look, and you might have disagreements about that, but at least they're operating within the rules. That's what we're asking for. And stop telling us that your little plot to go and buy a bunch of votes by delivering false promises was a Republican problem. Liars. You did that intentionally and maliciously. You knew where it was going. You delivered a ton of false hope, and it was a dishonest, irresponsible thing to do. It's like a parent telling a kid we're going to Disneyland, and then we're not going to Disneyland, we're going to the dentist. It's dishonest. You shouldn't be leading people down a bad road intentionally.
Is there any reconsideration, because this is a big question out there, of extending the pause on payments, which will resume in October?
Oh, big question. Oh, because they told us that was the end of it. I thought it was September. Did they push it to October? All right, remember, they kept kicking this can down the road. We've been waiting for this. When are they actually going to start the loans again? It's been years, and they kept telling us, next 6 months, this time, they're coming back. Next 6 months, next time. This is the final time they told us last time, and here we are.
Initially, we communicated that 60 days after the loan, the decision is made by the Supreme Court, payments will resume. And then with the debt negotiation conversations, that was really put to rest. Congress said there's no way that we can do that. So either way, they're going to start. But we want to make sure we're doing it in a way that's supportive of our borrowers and recognizing the fact that for many of them, they're going to be struggling to make payments and that they've been paused for 3 years, and we need to support them in this process. And that's what we're doing.
I forgot about that. So they did. They put that in the debt bill, right? That was their big victory. Student loans are starting back up.
Before I let you go, I just want to ask you about something former President Trump keeps saying, which is that high school principals, I should say, should be elected and also fired by votes from parents. You were a lifelong educator. Why would that be damaging? What about that concerns you?
I was an elementary school principal for 10 years. I'm an educator. And I think, the absurdity that comes out of his mouth it baffles me. Yeah, the last 2 days we've dealt with decisions that bring back education, decades. This is the same president that's talking about smaller government, now wanting to have his hand in the classroom, overreaching. Please, look, we have trained professionals.
It's parents. It's not him. It's the parents of the kids. It's not the president sticking his hands. It's enabling the parents. No, you're right. Gen Jen Psaki and Miguel Cardona should decide your kid's gender for you.
Professionals out there that are working closely with parents, we're supporting making sure that our parents and educators work together to have decisions being made at the ground level. The last thing we need is someone trying to get political points by creating culture wars and division in our country. Our kids need us to work together.
That's the whole Democratic Party, is splitting people up into little bins that they can just march down the aisle of the election and get their votes. So, okay, we have a little bit of a plan. It sounds like a lot of the plan is within the confines of the executive branch. And again, we haven't seen it articulated, but some of that other stuff was already there. We have relief built in for bankruptcy and, things like permanent disability, I think we covered. We also have other options for income-based repayments that might be modified. And so they're going to hold a rules hearing, and then you'll be able to go in and make some adjustments. But payments are starting in October. That was an act of Congress. And so this is going to be a very interesting thing to watch happen. Are we going to see a wave of defaults? What's the government going to do then? So as Biden, and as we'll soon see AOC, throw fits about what the court has done, fully within their power, completely democratically, within the position that they hold in this government, they're not happy about it. But a lot of Americans are. This was a new poll that came out from CBS. Says most Americans approve of the Supreme Court decision restricting the use of race in college admissions, from ABC. And this was just another opinion that came out. We were talking about student loans, but another historic case that came out was about affirmative action. ABC now has some numbers. A majority of Americans approve of the Supreme Court ruling restricting the use of race as a factor in admissions. The country is more divided on other high-profile rulings, according to a new poll. Supreme Court set new limits on affirmative action. A little more than half of Americans, 52%, approve of the Supreme Court decision on restricting the use of race as a factor. 32% disapprove, 16% say they don't know. So over half approve because it's a racist thing. A majority of Republicans came in at 75%, independents at 58%, and a distinct minority of Democrats even approved, 26%. Amazing. Probably bigoted white supremacists, Nazis. And there are deep divisions between racial groups. All right, most white people and Asian people approve. Oh, that's interesting. Shocking. And the decision, only 25% of black people support the decision. Hispanics are split, 40% approving, 40% disapproving. But most Americans support the decision to end affirmative action in university. Americans are less likely to think that black and Hispanic students have a fair chance of getting in. It's going to continue to draw divisions. I'm not sure that this is going to get any better at all. I think, remember, the laws can change, but the people who are in power, they stay the same, essentially. The Harvard administrators are going to stay the same. The law doesn't really matter what the law is. I mean, you'll file lawsuits against them, but people are going to people, and they're going to find ways to skirt it and rig the system, quite frankly. So I think that as this becomes more and more tense, I'm not sure that this heals racial divisions across America at all. In fact, I think it's going to cause a reaction from the left that might push things even further in the wrong direction. Why? Because people who are constant just race hucksters, who constantly scream about all of the different divisions that they would like to see created in society so that they can capitalize upon them. People like AOC, who are professionals at this line of work, are now screaming at the courts as well. She's not alone. She's joined by Presley and others like Ilhan Omar. House progressives are now calling for changes at the Supreme Court, following a slate of decisions on student debt, LGBTQ protections, and other things. We're going to listen to Ocasio-Cortez in a minute, but she's called for changes, including expanding the number of justices on the bench, in other words, packing the court. In ending abortion rights, landing a blow, she said the court is a dangerous creep towards authoritarianism. Wow. You mean the court operating perfectly normally and issuing rulings is a dangerous creep towards authoritarianism? It's like, what the hell is she talking about? So we'll go through it. But she's joined by others. Ayanna Pressley, another prominent House progressive, slammed the Supreme Court, saying if the court were a caucus in Congress, they're not, that they would be the bootstrapper forced to birth, don't say gay caucus. Don't even know what that means, but presumably she does. Said they continue to overturn the will of the majority of the people. I'm not sure that's true, because the NBC-ABC poll we just read said over half of the people agree with this. And to make history for all the wrong reasons, it's nothing but intersectional oppression, which is what they do. That's their entire game. If you open up their playbook, they have a message for every little contingent of society, and they go try to cobble them together to create a majority. So Politico has some background. This was AOC. Here's what she sounded like on CNN.
Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that the Constitution does not allow the president the power to unilaterally forgive student loans.
Right.
It's up to you in Congress to make this kind of
AOC.
sweeping change.
That's
Early in
your
his
job.
presidency, I think you remember, even President Biden said he doesn't have that authority. What's your response to the court's decision?
You know, what the court was also ruling on was with respect to the HEROES Act. But our response is very strong in that Congress has given the president that authority in the Higher Education Act. The president very squarely has, as well, using his Secretary of Education, the ability to cancel student loans. But
all right, so just to be clear, remember the three branches of government that we have. We have Congress, which writes the laws. They legislate. That's the representative function that we have. We elect Congress people to go in. They vote the will of the people. They write the laws. Then, in order to ensure that they don't have too much power, we give all of those laws over to the executive branch. The executive branch executes the laws. When there's conflicts or questions about the laws, the court tells us what the law is. Everything she's described here is pretty much perfect, right? It's great. Everything's working. She says, yeah, Congress does have the power. Our Congress gave the president the power that she says we gave. And the court say, no, you didn't. It's very unclear. It actually reads like it's lunacy to just articulate this one little provision, which is very clearly delineates conditions for relief. You tried to squeeze something in there that is totally inappropriate. So the system has been working literally perfectly, exactly as it was designed. You might disagree with the outcome on it, but that is the three-part system of democracy in action. So what happens now? Guess what? Congress could go back to the drawing board and pass a new bill. You know, they're not in charge in the House, but if they wanted to work with Congress, they certainly could do that with the other Republicans and come up with a student relief bill, get it passed in both houses, send it over to the Senate, and then wipe away whatever they want. They could wipe out all of the money. They could wipe out student loans. They could nationalize the entire student loan industry if they wanted to, but they don't want to do that. Why is that?
As we've seen, not just in what we saw ruled from the majority, but even in the minority dissent written around these cases, we have justices saying that the Supreme Court is going themselves much too far. They are expanding their role into acting as though they are Congress itself. And that, I believe, is an expansion of power that we really must be focusing on. The danger of this court and the abuse of power in this court, particularly as it...
What abuse of power? They literally issued an opinion. They voted on it.
Particularly as it is related to the entanglements around conflicts of interest as well.
You mentioned the Higher Education Act. President Biden came out and proposed a different path forward for student loan forgiveness under certain circumstances. Listen to what he said.
We will ground this new approach in a different law than my original plan, the so-called Higher Education Act. This new path is legally sound. It's going to take longer, but in my view, it's the best path that remains to providing for as many borrowers as possible with debt relief.
So just to be clear, he is saying that what he wants to do now is to try to use his executive power under what you were mentioning, the Higher Education Act, which is different from what the Supreme Court struck down. You are not only a member of Congress, I believe you still have student loans. This plan could take up to a year to take effect. Is there more that he could or should be doing?
Yes, I believe that there are several steps that we should be considering as well to go a step beyond. I would like to see interest payments suspended during this time, especially during that 12-month ramp period. There are millions of people in this country that have student loan debt under loan debt amounts under $10,000 or $20,000 as outlined in the plan.
Write a bill for it.
People should not be incurring interest during this 12-month on-ramp period.
You're in Congress.
I highly urge the administration to consider suspending those interest payments. Of course, we still believe in pursuing student loan cancellation and acting faster than that 12-month period wherever possible. What we have been really articulating this plan using the Higher Education Administration, the Higher Education Act for some time, myself as well as other members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus.
You guys don't have to strangely configure some Frankenstein theory on this, by the way. You are in Congress. You have a very, very, very big minority. You're not in control of the House, but you have a big I bet you could pull some Republicans over. So just write a bill. You don't have to have the executive branch do things that they're not empowered to do. That is totalitarianism. That is creeping authoritarianism, not the other way around.
Met with the White House recently around this plan, as well as many other advocates in the space as well. And we truly believe that Congress has given the president this authority. The Supreme Court is far overreaching their authority. And I believe, frankly, that we really need to be having conversations about judicial review as a check on the courts as well. well.
What does that even
talk more broadly about the court in a minute?
What does that mean, judicial review of the court? She wants to have judicial review of the court. Interesting. Now, judicial review is a legal term of art where the judiciary is doing the reviewing. But she's talking about a review of the judiciary like judicial review, like she's going to be reviewing them.
But first, I want to ask about another decision this past week, striking down affirmative action programs. The two black justices on the court, Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, had a really blistering debate that we don't usually see in decisions. Here is part of what Justice Thomas wrote. He said, quote, Justice Jackson uses her broad observations about statistical relationships between race and select measures of health, wealth, and well-being to label all blacks as victims. Her desire to do so is unfathomable to me.
Well,
it is an insult to individual achievement and cancerous to young minds seeking to push through barriers. Their race is not to blame for everything, good or bad, that happens in their lives. What is your response to that?
I mean, what Justice Clarence Thomas wrote there, I believe, is profoundly disrespectful.
Oh, my gosh.
I just think it was profoundly disrespectful to his colleague. It includes sweeping assumptions about her worldview. Whereas when you look at what...
She wrote it in a dissent, AOC. He's responding to her arguments that she wrote down. It's in a court opinion.
What the response was from Justice Ketanji Brown, we saw that her dissent was grounded in fact. It was grounded in the facts of the case. It did not disparage Clarence Thomas's overall worldview, but as a matter of fact, a nuanced critique of his analysis of the facts of the case. But for him to come out and insinuate that her opinion is due to some sort of inferior or less than really thought out of a stance, I think it's profoundly insulting. And I think that he really demonstrated his character.
Wow, they don't like being called out. When the race baiters get called out, when they just come out and they just, everything is an offense racially and all this stuff. And another person, hey, by the way, Clarence Thomas is a black man, by the way. So he is, I think, allowed to comment to Ketanji, and her not accepting his worldview is racist, as far as I can tell. All right, if they want to play that game, that's just how this works. But Ketanji and Clarence Thomas are doing what is ordinary in a court of law. They have a dissent. They have a disagreement. The majority has an opinion. The dissent has a disagreement. But Judge Clarence Thomas introduces a new idea that maybe it is a rotten thing to do to tell people, especially people of color or anybody in this world, that they are going to be disadvantaged. The world is rotten. Every time they step out their front door, some white person is going to steal their livelihood or put them back in slavery or something like this. That type of mindset, it really breaks my heart, honestly, to think about that, to think that there are just kids being raised in a world where AOC is telling them that every time they step outside, they've got to be petrified of the patriarchy or something like that. I mean, it's robbing kids of their innocence and their gender and, a community where they can be diverse with other kids of other colors if they're being brought up that their skin color, their gender, whatever it is, right? It's a rotten thing that they're doing. But when you call them out on it, when Clarence Thomas, who has the intelligence relative to these two, and Ketanji's in there as well, of exponential differences, it offends them. And so they just, as we often talk about, you either pound the law, you pound the facts, or if you're irritated and you don't have anything good to say, you pound the table. This is exactly what AOC is doing. He's pounding the table. How could Clarence Thomas essentially be racist against Ketanji?
Frankly, and his worldview in that critique himself.
He's also a black man.
You've called on President Biden to expand the Supreme Court to 13 justices, but even after
the court.
Roe was overruled last year, and this past week, what we saw with affirmative action and other cases, I want you to listen to what President Biden said. He said this on Thursday on MSNBC.
I think if we start the process of trying to expand the court, we're going to politicize it maybe forever in a way that is not healthy.
That you can't get back.
That you can't get back.
Yeah, it's a fair point from Joe.
I'd like you to respond to that. And also, you mentioned a moment ago, judicial review. Are you also saying that the justice's power should somehow be limited?
Okay, so did you hear that? So some producer in her ear said, hey, go back and talk about judicial review. What did she mean by that? Great producer. Good question.
I truly do. And this is not a new development in history. This is part of our system of checks and balances.
Tell us about it.
The courts, if they were to proceed without any check on their power, without any balance on their power, then we will start to see an undemocratic and frankly dangerous authoritarian expansion of power.
What are you going to do?
In the Supreme Court, which is what we are seeing now, from the overturning of abortion rights to the ruling that discrimination and frankly stripping the full personhood and dignity of LGBTQ people.
Wow, the court stripped the full dignity of all LGBTQ people. Did you hear that? Well, if you're in the audience and you just heard AOC and you fall into one of those categories, apparently there's nothing left for you. Sorry.
In the United States, these are the types of rulings that signal a dangerous creep towards authoritarianism and centralization of power in the court. In fact, we have members of the court themselves, with Justice Elena Kagan, saying that the court is beginning to assume the power of a legislature. And right now, whether it is expansion of the court.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just want to, how do you do that?
Yeah, what are you going to do?
Are you proposing a law?
Impeach them?
Or a bill?
Defund them?
There's several ways. First, we have a Senate Judiciary Committee that is beginning the process of investigating the entanglements and conflicts of interest. Just 1 to 2
Senate
weeks before the student loan ruling, the country learned that Justice Samuel Alito was accepting gifts from billionaires who were lobbying against Supreme Court
impeachment,
that were lobbying before the Supreme Court
your
against student loan forgiveness. Just weeks before, we learned that he was accepting gifts from them and travel and vacations from them before he decided to vote and rule in their favor. And so I believe that if Chief Justice Roberts will not come before Congress for an investigation voluntarily, I believe that we should be considering subpoenas. We should be considering investigations. We must pass much more binding and stringent ethics guidelines where we see members of the Supreme Court potentially breaking the law, as we saw in the refusal, with Clarence Thomas to recuse himself from cases implicating his wife in January 6th. There also must be impeachment on the table.
Hey, there it is.
We
I was waiting for that.
have a broad level of tools to deal with misconduct, overreach, and abuse of power. And the Supreme Court has not been receiving the adequate oversight necessary in order to preserve their own legitimacy. And in the process, they themselves have been destroying the legitimacy of the court, which is profoundly dangerous for our entire democracy.
Okay, first of all, they have been the people destroying the legitimacy of the court every time there's a ruling that they don't like. Sorry about that. Every time there is a ruling that they don't like, they turn the table and they say, we're going to pack the court. We're going to adjust it so that we get our way. But this is a very interesting dynamic. Now, I think AOC has a hard time with the Constitution. She was struggling around there until she did start talking about things like impeachment, which I'd love to, if they really want to go hard on it, they should send subpoenas and they should consider them to be subject to congressional will, because there are other agencies that may also be subject to congressional will. The FBI might want to show up. In other words, we might be able to see where some of these divisions lie. And I don't think that AOC has a leg to stand on. I think that what the court has done here is literally perfectly within their authority. There's 6-3 decisions all throughout our history. There are bad decisions that get reversed all the time. This is just ordinary operating procedure. But AOC just, wants to come up with new tools to continue to squeeze the juice out of the victimization categories and continue to milk it for more votes for her base, all, in my opinion, totally dishonestly in ways that serve her interests, but not the country's interests.